Welcome to episode 6 of the Ghost Furnace podcast. Today, you will hear the story of a former zoo employee and their potential cryptid sighting. One case of high strangeness and a few ghost stories that leave more questions than answers. If you have a paranormal experience of your own that you would like to share, please email it to us at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoy the show, please rate, subscribe, and review on whichever platform you use. Also, like and share us on Instagram and Facebook. The hosts of the Ghost Furnace podcast are Nick, Pennsylvania, Bond, sometimes referred to as Brendan, and Mike. Thank you and enjoy the show.
So I have a pretty fun interview for everyone tonight. This one was with my good friend Dave Stewart. Me and Dave went to college together and have some pretty wild stories. These ones never came up in our conversations up at Slippery Rock. However, Dave now is a working DJ and stand-up comedian. So he is really good on the microphone, and he had some really wild stories that I was kind of unprepared for. So I'm really excited to share them all with you guys this evening and see what everyone thinks. So here's my interview with my friend Dave. Okay, everyone, I am here with my good friend Dave Stewart, who is a local DJ and comedian here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And me and Dave go way back, and I'm super excited to be talking to him this evening. He has a few really weird stories for us that he kind of only gave me a little bit of a preface on, so I'm getting this at the same time you are. So either way, I'm really excited. So Dave, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us this evening.
Oh man, thank you. I'm pumped to be here. This is really exciting. Thanks for having me. And dude, it's great to see you.
Exactly, man. It's been too long. It's been too long.
Let's do it, man. Let's hop right in. Let's get
awesome.
Spooky.
Yeah, exactly. Let's get spooky. This is Jim Harold says. So what's the first story you have for us this evening?
So the first one involves, I guess, like a cryptid. Okay.
Oh, okay.
In 2009 to 2011, I was playing in a band called Talk About It. Okay. Mm-hmm. With my friend Lee Yarnell.
Mm-hmm. Good friend of ours. Yep.
Who's currently in Danvers, which are awesome. So check them out, please. I was still living at home, so I grew up in Harrison Township, Pennsylvania. Okay, so mm-hmm. I'm from Natty Heights, represent.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a show. So if you don't know, Natty Heights is about like 30 minutes from downtown Pittsburgh, like on 28. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we had a show at the Garfield Artworks in Garfield on.
Oh yeah.
So we had a show at the Garfield Artworks, and I still lived at home. So after the show, I had to drive back to Natty Heights because I had to work in the morning. Okay, it's like November-ish. I'm on 20 heading north, and I'm just passing the Pittsburgh Mills.
Okay.
So
I know where you're at.
Yeah. So there's the Mills, and then about 5 minutes down the road, you pass Creighton, and then past that's Tarentum, and then Natty Heights.
Yeah, they're kind of all stacked up there along the river. Yeah.
Exactly. There is like a little overpass because there's an area where when you travel to the Mills, like from Deer Lakes area, you can go up, and then there's like an overpass that goes into the Mills. It goes into that whole area. Okay. So I was just passing, like going under that overpass. All right. And again, it's like 11:30 at night. So traffic isn't heavy at all. So like there's maybe one other car probably like 100 yards behind me. Mm-hmm. And if this wasn't so weird, it wouldn't be so vivid. Like I feel like I remember so many details because it was so strange.
Yeah, yeah.
Going under that overpass, and something runs in front of my car on all fours. All right.
Really? Okay.
It's big. Not like elephant big, but like I would say comparable in size, kind of like kind of the size of like a big brown bear.
Oh, really? That big?
Yeah. And okay. I thought maybe it was a bear, like a brown bear. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that luckily I'm a nerd, and I went to the zoo for many years. Brown bears, polar bears, they don't have that hump in their back like a grizzly bear does.
Yeah.
So, but it was built kind of strange, and it but it was like the size of like a big dog, but it wasn't like like a black bear even. They're kind of round, usually. And of course, this is November, so this is when like a black bear would have been like eating a lot and putting on wait.
Yeah, getting ready for hibernation. Yeah.
This animal was like kind of leggy, and it
Really?
was
Okay.
yeah, it was kind of leggy, and it was shaggy. Like it had like shaggy hair, like almost like you'd imagine on a on like an Afghan hound or something. You know what I mean?
Really?
Or like, yeah, it was like shaggy, kind of mangy looking, but it was covered in hair.
Mm-hmm.
And the hair was kind of like reflective off my headlight. So it was
So it
like
had like
kind
a
of
sheen almost to it.
yeah, it was like kind of silvery.
Okay.
Okay. But in the way that it ran, it wasn't like in a sprint. Like it wasn't like booking across the road. It had like a weird, like a gallop. Like,
really?
yeah.
Okay.
Like if you'd ever seen like I used this before, like kind of if you've ever seen like video of like how a wildebeest gallops.
Yeah, they kind of like almost hop where there's like the best wording is like they almost like undulate. Yeah, where it's like the back comes up and the front comes up. Yeah.
They're not the most graceful animals.
Yeah.
So it, did this kind of like real sloppy gallop across the road.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like its head had a long snout, kind of like a Great Dane,
mm-hmm.
thick, like it was big.
Yeah, it wasn't like thin. Yeah.
And it had like jowls. How you see, kind of like a big old dog with the droopy jowls.
Yeah.
I could see teeth in the mouth.
Oh wow.
And it kind of looked like. So at first, I was kind of like, was that maybe like a really old bear?
Yeah.
Maybe like it's a bear that like it's too old to really put on weight for the winter, so it's kind of mangy. But then like the more I drove and I went home and just kind of like laid in bed for like an hour, just being like, what did I see?
Mm-hmm.
Like you've known me for a long time. Like I'm a super nerd. I love animals. I like dinosaurs. So like I feel like very rarely am I going to see an animal and not know what it is. I saw this animal for like 5-10 seconds. Yeah. But it burned into my head.
Yeah.
I'll never forget it.
Yeah. Cause I mean, at 28 there, if you're going northbound and everything, cause I'm pretty sure I know the exact intersection that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like between the barriers, you have like 2 lanes plus like the whole berm, on both sides.
Yeah. So
you would have been able to see it for quite a distance.
Well,
like left to right.
So for the folks listening at home, imagine like I'm on a highway. So I'm in the left lane going northbound. Okay. So next to me is the right lane. Then after that, there's a little guardrail. Then that just goes to like a cliffside that goes down into like Creighton area. Yeah. To my left is like a pretty wide grassy median, and then the southbound lanes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then above me is an overpass.
Overpass, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but it's one of those things where like this area wasn't very well lit because the mills was kind of still fairly new. I feel like.
Yeah. Back then it would have been. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't see it until it was like in front of my car.
Yeah. It's not like there's lots of streetlights there or anything. Yeah.
And honestly, I kind of wish I would have hit it.
just to see what it was.
Yeah. Like straight up like Hare and Henderson style, hit that some bitch and check them out. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. No, that's wild. So a few questions. How tall do you think it stood like at the shoulder?
I'm 6 foot tall. And at the time I was driving my 2002 Mercury Sable called the Silver Bullet. Thank you very much. So, but I would say that like it was just a sedan, it's a Mercury Sable. But I would say that if it was like standing next to my car, its shoulder would be like in the middle of like the driver's side window.
Okay, so that's I mean I think we could say that like if that's how big it is, that is significantly larger than like an adult black bear.
Yeah, I mean, so an adult male black bear tops out at the most maybe 700 pounds.
Yeah.
Females are way smaller. So black bear is one of those animals that has like a really varied gender dimorphism, which is when the genders of the two species are very different sizes. Like humans, you see it a lot in different primates. You see a lot in bears and a lot of birds, right? Male black bears are anywhere from like 400 to like 700 pounds. Females can be 250, even as low as 90 pounds. So it's a big difference. You know what I mean? So like I would say it definitely wasn't a bear. I just don't know what it was.
I think what makes this interesting is you have a background with being around non-native animals, you know, like working at the zoo and everything. So I would say that you are like, you're obviously not a biology expert or a zoologist or anything, but as far as a general like observer of something like this goes, I think you are probably in a better situation to say what's normal and what's not normal, you know?
Well, especially because I've talked to people at the zoo about this encounter.
Mm-hmm. What did they have to say?
They were usually, it was just lots of like, well, that's weird, buddy.
Yeah,
like a lot of that stuff. And usually, but I mean, I was able to talk to people who have been, handling bears and lions and tigers and elephants and rhinos their whole life, for 30 years. And they were like, usually it was like, that's interesting kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or, and usually it was just lots of like, it was a bear, calm down. But I'll tell you what, man, if you saw this thing's head, it wasn't a bear.
So if you had to put, like, my final question on this would just be, if, you got $100 on the table, what do you think, if you had to say, this is what I think it was, what do you think it was?
Probably an episode in the long buried life of Mr. Gary Busey. I think he was like, "Have you ever seen Buddy Holly? That was me." Sorry, but no. Honestly, like, to be rational, I would say it probably was like an old sick bear. If I had to guess anything, that's probably what it was. Yeah. It can't be for sure, and it didn't look like a bear at all. I don't know. But again, you could also even argue that, like, this area doesn't have a very large bear population, so they don't have a very deep gene pool. So it was a bear that had, like, every birth defect. You don't know, but it's man, that's a crazy story. If that's the one we're starting with, I'm really curious to see where this goes from here. Oh yeah, man, buckle up.
So what's your second story?
Like I said before, my family's from like Tarentum, Trenton Heights area. We're all from there. So this is actually a story from like when I was a baby. So when I was like about 2 years old, my mom moved us into a 3-unit house in Tarentum, in East Trenton. So we were on the first floor. The second floor was my mom's friend and her husband and their 2 kids. The third floor was empty. Okay, that's kind of important. All right. Yeah. Third floor is empty. Again, I'm a baby, so my mom and her siblings get her moved in. And get kind of like the house assembled to some degree. Everyone leaves. All right. It's like 7 o'clock. She puts me to bed. She chills for a little bit, watches some TV, like has a snack, and then around like 11 o'clock goes to go to the restroom to go to bed. So she goes to the restroom, and she notices that she hears like the deep chimes of like a grandfather clock. Okay. Like, just, sounds like it's upstairs. Just kind of like,
like that bong. Bong. Yeah.
She was like, oh, she was like, that's loud. Holy hell. So that's loud. But then she was like, it's nice. But she also didn't hear it any other time though. It wasn't like at midnight she heard it again. It was just at like 11 o'clock. Okay. So okay. Next night, same thing. Puts me to bed, watch some TV, little snacky snack, then goes use the restroom. Same thing. 11 o'clock, she hears those chimes. All right. So the third day, she's out in the backyard. She's out in the backyard with me. I'm a baby. We're playing. Doing baby stuff. I'm just like,
baby stuff.
I'm just like giggling around and poop my pants, doing baby stuff. I'm sure I was probably rocking some sweet Oshkosh bagosh. Oh yeah. Respect the drip, as the kids say. I just realized, like, I sound so dumb trying to sound cool. Like, I can't say things like respect the drip.
Right? It just does.
But we're outside playing, doing baby stuff, and here comes my mom's friend and her 2 kids. They're still friends actually to this day. We've been friends for over 30 years.
Oh wow.
So, that's pretty cool. My mom says, "Hi, I'm Kimberly, and this is David, and we just moved in, and how are you? And they're talking a little bit. And as we're chatting, my mom just kind of says, oh, by the way, I really like your clock.
Mm-hmm.
And Pat says, oh, we don't have a clock. What do you mean?
Okay.
And my mom was like, oh, like every night I hear these like the deep chimes of this like grandfather clock, like a floor clock. And she's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And she's like, well, what about on the third floor? And Pat says, oh, that's empty. She's like, actually, the landlord paid me to clean it, so I know it's empty. There's nothing up there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So my mom was like, oh, that's weird. All right. So so that night, though, she kind of listens for a little bit.
Yeah.
And there's no chimes. Nothing happens to it. Nothing happens. So she's like, all right, well, I guess no more clock. Oh, well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then now the next night, all right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Go through the day, baby stuff, oshkosh bagosh, the drip, all that good stuff. And 7:30 or so, puts me to bed. She has her Yoplait yogurt and banana, whatever she's having. I don't know. Whatever mom snack on, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And, goes use the restroom. I'm sure after watching Night Court, I imagine. It's like 1987 at this point, I think. And when it's like 11 or so, she hasn't heard the chimes. When she opens the medicine cabinet, all of these cogs and springs and gears fall out of the medicine cabinet. Actually, they didn't fall out of the medicine cabinet. She says, actually asked about this recently. It wasn't like they were in the medicine cabinet. It was like when she opened the medicine cabinet door, they like blooped out of thin air and fell in the sink.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
That is insane. So just like clock parts. Like if you were like if you were to go to Construction Junction and say, hey, I need a box of clock parts.
Yeah.
That's what they would. Wow.
Yeah. And so she was like, it was like they like manifest out of nowhere. They just out of nowhere.
Now, oh geez, man, like anytime you have something that like manifests or like apports out of nothing, that's really crazy. Okay. So how did that affect her? Like what did she do? What happens next?
Well, she like kind of started screaming, not like out of fear, out of like almost like it's like surprise. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So she kind of did like she was kind of like, like what is this?
Mm-hmm.
And now she gathered them all up and put them in a jar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And she showed my grandparents and her siblings and Pat upstairs and stuff.
Yeah.
And told the story.
Understandable. Yeah.
So we lived in that house until I was 8 years old. We moved out of there. We moved out of there November of 93. I was in third grade. This is when my mom bought the house that she lives in now. All right. Mm-hmm. And she says that she packed that jar herself and put it in a box with like her personal stuff. Right. She put that jar of clock parts in a box and brought it to our new house.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got home and unpacked, it was gone.
Wow. So, geez, did she ever find it? Did it ever turn up?
It's gone.
Just gone. Just gone. As it came. Did you ever have any other things like weird happen in this house, or is this the only singular real event?
I know that I used to have, but like kids have crazy dreams. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But when we lived in that house, I had really real and like vivid dreams, some scary and some not scary.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember this like it was yesterday. I had a dream. I think it was a dream. Like honestly, I thought I was awake. Okay.
Mm-hmm. One of those ones. Yeah. So
in my bedroom, I'm an only child, but for some reason I had to have bunk beds. I like insisted on it. So
just because they were cool. Yeah,
I wanted bunk beds. Oh, you know why I wanted bunk beds? Because of the movie Three Ninjas. Because
that makes sense. Beds. That makes sense. Yeah.
I was like, I want bunk beds like Colt and Tum Tum. So in my bedroom, like my bed was like in the back corner.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like you go in the door, and to your right was like my dresser. That's the right hand corner on this side was bunk beds. All right.
Okay.
And then on the left side of the wall, there was a closet door, and we had a laundry chute. That was awesome, actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And by the way, I wish I had one of those now.
Oh, and that'd be great. I don't know why people stopped using those.
Straight up. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Any hooter. I had a nightstand with a lamp on it. And I remember getting up and feeling kind of spooky. And I guess I had a dream.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I woke up. I swear that I was awake. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I turned on my lamp and I'm sitting there and kind of like looking in the room, kind of just, it's like middle of the night.
Yeah.
I'm feeling spooky. I feel like I've actually never said this really out loud that much. It sounds like I just had a dream.
Yeah.
But I swear I could see what looked like a face pressing through the door, like it was vinyl or something, or like,
oh my gosh, like poltergeist style.
Yeah. And then like that, I was like frozen in fear and I started screaming. And then, you know, my mom said, "Oh, you had a bad dream." I don't think I was dreaming.
You don't think you were dreaming though?
Yeah.
Wow.
Now I want to say though that this is, you know, absolutely not to and I mean this with absolutely no disrespect. I'm not religious, so I don't have any kind of like preconceived notion of an afterlife. I don't really prescribe to a real idea of like a god or gods or anything. I'm open to those ideas. I guess I'm more agnostic, so I'm open to the ideas of things, but I'm not convinced by them at all.
Yeah.
So this is coming from a place of a skeptic who doesn't really believe in the paranormal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I do think people who, you know, no judgment. I think people who are highly invested in those kind of lives and people who are very strong believers of like an afterlife and a deity or deities and whatnot, I think are kind of always maybe looking for this kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, and I think the big thing is that no matter what background you're coming from, whether it be agnostic or more religious, regardless of whichever one it is, I think these experiences are always going to be seen through those different lenses that we have, whether they're cultural contexts or religious contexts or social, you know. I agree. Yeah.
So that's just a little side note, but
so the clock and everything.
Well,
so
the house was really old and it always kind of gave me the willies.
Yeah, so it was a spooky house, just in general.
It was spooky.
What did your mom did your mom have any like theories of like where this stuff came from or who it might have been attached to, like a previous owner or maybe a previous family member? It doesn't even necessarily mean it was attached to the house, might have been attached to one of the family members, you know. And did she have any ideas or thoughts on that?
I kind of feel like she's just always kind of been like, you know what, like it like came from like a different dimension or something. Right? It just came from like different, like she's like it just blooped out of nowhere. You know what I mean? It just kind of like she opened the like I have a lid here from Tupperware, so I'll give you a little visual aid, right? It was like there was nothing here. She opened the door and all of a sudden, boop, like that.
Just there. Yeah. Wow. That's a wild story because it's like, and it's like, even from like a skeptical standpoint, there's so few like options in a story like this. One of three things had to basically happen, you know. Either your mom's totally making it up and just happened to find a box of clock parts and was like, hey, here's a good story. Like that's option number one. Option number two is that someone decided to put clock parts in behind your mirror in your bathroom, which, you know, doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. And she opened the door and they just fell out and she thought they appeared. Or option three, they appeared, you know. And it's like, it's really weird that those are the only three options because none of them make any sense. You know, like none of them make any sense, you know. Like if you're gonna make up a ghost story, this isn't the kind of story you make up, you know, kind of thing.
And like, my mom, that's not her style.
I wouldn't imagine so. It's just that's wild.
Like my mom's funny, but she's kind of serious though. Like I would say like Kim Stewart is not a liar. You know what I'm saying? And so like she would have, and she's never like tried to like sell the story or something or like write a book, you know, like it's just, you know.
And the fact that she put them in a jar and was like, and would like show them to people, like that almost sounds like she's trying to like get some validation. Like, hey, does anyone else have any ideas? Because I sure don't. You know, that's kind of what it sounds like. And typically when you have these kind of like, I don't even know if you'd call this a ghost story. It's more high strangeness rather than anything else. And when you have these kinds of stories, that's just kind of what everyone's left kind of doing, is just looking around like, does anyone have an idea? Because, who the hell knows?
Yeah.
That's crazy, man. Wow. Okay, well, you exceeded my expectations going from story 1 to story 2, so I'm really excited about story 3.
All right. So, in my grandfather, whose name was also Dave Stewart. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Good name. Good name.
He passed away when I was 11 in 1996. All right.
Okay.
Both my grandparents on my mom's side had like a lot of siblings. All right.
Mm-hmm. Same. Yep.
Like, because my pap and my grandma were like one of the youngest in their families.
Mm-hmm.
Had siblings that were like way older that I didn't even meet because they passed away before I was even born.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the preface is that my grandfather's brother Chuck passed away probably like 9 years before this.
Mm-hmm.
And he was actually the youngest one. He passed away first, which is very sad.
Mm-hmm.
And he already passed away. Okay. One of their sisters, and I don't want to say the wrong names. I honestly kind of always mix up.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to say the wrong name, but so one of their sisters
mm-hmm.
was in Cincinnati, and she was also sick. Okay. So while my grandfather was battling cancer, he was battling cancer. His sister was in Cincinnati, and she was sick, and she was like on her last like couple weeks. Okay?
Yeah.
So not everyone could go, obviously. So they sent my Aunt Lori as like
the representative almost from that part of the family. Yeah.
Like, see, I believe it was Aunt Louise. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It was Aunt Louise. It's Aunt Lori to go see Aunt Louise, just kind of pay her respects and say goodbye to her. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to not upset her while she was so sick, they didn't tell her that my grandfather had cancer.
Oh, okay? Wow. Okay. Yeah.
They figured that it would just make her upset.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which I understand that for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. I can kind of see where they're coming from. Yeah.
So when my Aunt Lori walks in the door, and as soon as Aunt Louise sees her, she bursts out in tears. And when she does, they're like, "Oh, Aunt Louise, what's the matter?"
Mm-hmm.
And she says, "How come no one told me my brother David has cancer?"
Whoa.
And they say, "Well, how did you know that?" And she says, "Chucky told me."
Oh, really? Jeez.
Because I do believe that, like, if there's something after this life.
I got chills when you said that, man. That's a good one.
Like, when you're towards the end of this life, if there's something else, I think when you're at the end, I think you're walking through worlds. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree. And so, like, and again, you guys at the time don't think anybody had any way of letting her know that ahead of time.
No, and everyone said, do not tell Aunt Louise that.
Yeah, so it was a conscious decision, even. Because it's one of those things. Like, it would be different if she just like maybe happened to hear, kind of thing. But if everyone was on the same page, like unfortunately, all of us know how that stuff goes with family members,
Yeah.
And it's that's wild, man. And how did your family react to that?
I mean, it was just everyone was like shocked.
Yeah,
everyone was just like, I think. From obviously the story that I've been told years later,
mm-hmm.
the room was just like a gasp. Everyone was like,
"Yeah,
what just happened?"
Wow, wow. You got to wonder if that made anything easier for anybody.
Yeah,
knowing like, hey, like she might be on her way out, but knowing that like your relative Chucky was there to, he's there with her. Well, excellent, man. Well, hey, thank you so much for the stories. Those were really, really wild. Yeah. So before we go though, again, I know you're a busy man with both your DJing and your comedy. So do you have anything coming up you want to let our audience know about? This episode might not come out for a few weeks, but anything on the horizon for you?
Honestly, I mean, because of the pandemic, not really, to be honest with you. So I don't have any like live shows booked or anything like that. Honestly, I've just been really pumped and lucky to get into some podcasts to kind of just be able to kind of perform a little bit. And,
Yeah.
that's great. So honestly, again, dude, thank you for the opportunity. It's been really great. So, but yeah, so again, my name is Dave Stewart. You can find me on Instagram at Dave_Stewart_412, where you can find me on TikTok, where I do my quote unquote funny stuff, or as my wife calls it, my dumb stuff. But you can find me on TikTok at Biggest Dave.
Biggest Dave.
Yeah, BIGGEST_DAVE. Biggest Dave. Oh yeah. Also, so again, I'm the host and producer of a show called Real Pittsburgh Stories.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So it's at the Arcade Comedy Theater downtown. They've been really, really good to me, and they've been fantastic. So shout out to Jason Cook down there, who's just a great guy. I also just want to real fast is give a shout out to some Pittsburgh comedians. So hey, if you're able to, go check out Joey Purse, Paige Polesnik, Kaylee Dumas, Marcus Cox, Daniel Ferrer, Derek Minto, Amanda Averill. Hey, Dave on Magwood. He's a funny guy. So check him out too, man. So, and Shannon Norman.
Well, yeah, man. I mean, right now with the pandemic and everything, hopefully we'll be able to get back and to be able to support you guys in person sooner than later if we're lucky. So. Yeah,
man. Honestly, yeah. This has been great, man. This has been a lot of fun, and dude, good luck to you, and keep it going, man. This is great.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much. Have a good night.
Bye. You got it.
So everyone, that was my interview with Dave Stewart. I had a really good time talking with him and catching up, and the fact that he had these stories just kind of waiting was really, really exciting. I had a good time listening to them and gave me a lot of really wild things to think about. So I'm excited to hear what you guys think about them. So what were some of your guys' impressions? I guess we should talk about the first one first. We should probably try and go in order.
You texted both of us a couple weeks ago saying you were going to be interviewing Dave, and you specifically used the phrase Big Dave. And when I read that, I immediately thought of the Dave of which you were referring, but I hadn't realized, one, that Mike knew Dave really at all, just the littlest bit of run-ins, but I didn't know that you had maintained contact with him, because I have to tell a very short story of how I met Dave, because I think I'm a nice person. I've been described as being almost like unbearably polite in most situations. Mike is shaking his head no and then giggling. But at the time when I first met him, I was in the English department and I was in a creative writing course. And apparently, unbeknownst to me, I had a reputation for sleeping in class and then waking up and just being very blunt and kind of cold in my critique of other people's writing. And the first the first time I was aware that I first learned this when my friend Katie woke me up. I made some comment about Dave's story. And then after class, a couple of people were like, well, that's really harsh. And I didn't think of it that way. So I actually tracked down where he lived, because that's not creepy at all. And I waited outside, and when I saw him come out, I went up and I apologized to him. And I'm like, listen, I know I was kind of harsh. I know I said your characters were kind of caricatures and not so much. And he was really cool. But I feel like ever since then, every time I see Dave, I'm still apologizing for that. But I ran into him a couple years ago, because not only DJ, not only stand-up comedian, he was working at the zoo for a good while. I think he even mentions that at one point. So yeah, that was the first time. So what a weird and fun and good thing it was to hear his voice again, because he absolutely a much nicer person, and certainly my first impressions upon him must have felt. But I'll say real quick, though, the one thing that really stuck with me listening to Dave's story was the appearance of the clock parts. I thought that was very weird. You've kind of introduced a new concept, the two of you, to me some time ago, the high strangeness thing. And that's kind of what I thought. We've talked about weird time things as well in the past. And as I'm trying to rationalize how could they have appeared, And I'm wondering just how the story has morphed, how the memory has changed. Could they have fallen from some? I don't know. But the bottom line is that was the really weird takeaway, that those parts were kept for so long and even supposedly moved with them. And were they just lost in the move, or were they lost because they left some sort of connection to where they were at? I don't know. That's just the weirdest thing. And that's the most memorable sticking point of that story.
Yeah, just to comment on that real quick. I think whenever me and Dave were talking, I brought up the fact that, like, well, I mean, one, like, you could hear how surprised I am when he said that happened in the interview. Like, I was like, that's not what I was expecting to have him say. And he did say, like, his mother is like a very, like, serious person in the sense that, like, she doesn't mess around with stuff. I think I said in the interview, or it may have been after, but I said there's 3 possibilities with that story, and this goes along with the high strangeness kind of thing, where either she's making it up. She's making the whole thing up and it never really happened, and she just found a box of clock parts in a closet. But given Dave's description of his mother and how she acted afterwards, that doesn't seem to be the case. Option 2 is that everything happened exactly how she said, and these clock parts just apported out of nowhere and fell into the sink. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. Option 3 is someone's playing a trick on a mother moving into a new house by making the sound, 1, and then 2, putting clock parts into a cabinet. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense either.
None of the explanations make any
sense. None of them make any sense whatsoever. And
that's part of what's so unsettling about it, because the closest thing I could come up was, as I recall, Dave said that she was opening a medicine cabinet.
Yes.
As things, and I was wondering if was there a gap? Was this like a plaster wall, and were things falling out that were just like random screws and tidbits that were then, because of the whole clock sound, associated them with that?
Yeah.
And even that is like, that is just not a satisfying explanation in any way, shape, or form. But that was the closest thing to any sort of reasonable thing I could come up with. And it just isn't any more or less probable or satisfying than the 3 that you've proposed. Mike, I don't know what your thoughts are.
What are some of your thoughts, Mike?
Something I found was really interesting about it is that, she heard the clock, she acknowledged to herself how much she liked the sound of it, and then whenever she talked to her friend who lived in the other apartment and found out that there was no clock in the building, that she didn't hear the clock anymore. And then that's whenever that happened, where she opened the door and they like basically manifested in front of her and fell into the sink. It's just bizarre. I mean, it's a cool story, but I'm just not sure what to think about it,
What do you do with it? And I think it brings up a few things. One, I want to see what you guys think about the idea that, like, let's say hypothetically, and obviously we're in the realm of just complete conjecture at this point because we all agree how it doesn't even align with anything normally. Like, let's say this is a paranormal experience in the sense that there is some sentient entity responsible for the situation. Because if it was just her hearing a clock that wasn't there, then we could maybe chalk it up to the idea of like some kind of a residual haunting and phantom noises. But since it showed itself to her, then disappeared sonically, and then showed up in this very real physical way that scared the heck out of her. Let's say it is a ghost. Maybe that was the only way it could communicate in some way, shape, or form. Because as we've talked before about the idea that who knows what set of rules or abilities anything could possibly be playing by. If it was an entity, maybe this is the only way it could communicate with her.
Well, one thing I'll say about it, and I think one of the reasons why it's stuck with me so much, is because it's not, like I said, any sort of explanation that you give is just unsatisfactory. And that's in large part because if this were a typical common thread among spooky stories, like you said, your reaction was very genuine upon hearing it because it wasn't where you thought the story was going to go, because it's not an archetypical story. It's not that, like we've heard the story of your friend who was in a Victorian house up in an attic apartment. Well, that's the sort of location where one would expect ghost stories to take place. And the appearance of random clock parts, it just doesn't follow that same thing. If it were the appearance of a random pocket watch, or like a singular item associated, that would be something different. But again, we've talked about how ghosts are attached to a thing, like a house. And I've brought up the point that, well, a house is really a collection of many things, most of which we don't even consider, like the nails that are in the studs that are in the wall, or your lathe board, or whatever. This is looking at the guts of a clock. And it may be false identification. It might just be random springs and whatnot. But again, it's just such a weird thing. Mike, I know you want to jump in.
I just wanted to say I normally do consider the studs in the internal workings.
You would, because having been a contractor, this is true. No, you're right. You do. The average bear does not. But the one thing you bring up is communication. And again, if a thing has an ability to move, or physical objects, or to materialize seemingly from the antiquated term ether, from another dimension, like, how is it not able to communicate by drawing on the wall, which would be more archetypical, or, sending an email? Like, why not that? Why this? It just seems like more effort. And you talk about rules, I think about laws, and it's just, again, nothing is satisfying.
When I hear any kind of story, I think, what is this entity or whatever it is trying to convey? If there's some type of message.
Oh, I think it's, you like my clock? Here, make your own. It's a Hallicrafters model. I don't know.
Well, that could be one. But the only thing I could think was that maybe at some point in time there was a clock in that building, and this entity, say it wants this clock, once it's fixed, and even though the clock's not there anymore, it just presents these pieces somehow.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. Is I wonder if this is a case where maybe we don't have all of the pieces, for lack of a better term, to this puzzle. Maybe there were other things that happened that she either didn't notice or just left out of the story, or didn't think were paranormal, maybe, or related, that would paint a larger picture of communication. Or is this an issue of just something weird happening that doesn't have any rhyme or reason? Does there need to be an explanation, I guess, is what I'm always asking myself now.
I certainly would like to see what these clock parts look like, because could this be misidentification? Because it's entirely possible that they were just like random springs and whatnot, unless there was a clock face among them, or it could have been like parts for, like a small transistor radio or a Walkman, which, as you know, Walkman parts materializing out of thin air is just a commonplace occurrence that could easily be mistaken for a non-technical person as clock parts.
Well, that's an interesting thing you bring up, though, and I think that the misidentification element of it is like the closest thread we have. I think you're right, and I think that if that was the case, though, because she kept them in a jar and showed them to multiple people over a span of years, if it was misidentification, you would think someone, especially in that era, would have been like, oh, that's the inside of a Walkman, not a clock.
And of course, I'm only joking.
Oh, but no, but seriously, no, but
materialize in front of me.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying, like, hypothetically, let's say that there were just the like random parts in the cabinet that were from who knows what. When I think of clock parts, I think of, like you said, the springs, but also like cogs and things like that would have been used in like a Walkman or a VCR or something like that to actually move the playheads.
Especially since it was mentioned that this was more of a floor model or a grandfather's clock type clock.
Yes. Yeah, I believe that's what Dave said it sounded like. Yeah.
Many of the parts would be somewhat larger, but it just, again, springs and cogs and even all of these things without the particular eye could come from a great number of different mechanical things. The clock, of course, it's not. We're in this story, and in the context, we're not going to think of it as anything other than a clock, because she's already kind of had her world kind of made feel weird. The strangeness of this whole clock experience that came to nothing.
Yeah, and we go back to the fact again that this is in a liminal time. They're just moving in. Things are new, and I think that has to be something that's said. But again, like you said, even if it was something else, the idea that no one else identified it as something other than the clock, I think is strange. And like you're right that, like, let's say it was a Walkman, it shouldn't materialize in front of your face and then drop into your sink. You know,
True.
Normally.
Yeah.
Unless you really are looking hard for it and it just appears in front of you.
Right.
I can't jog without it, Mike.
Yeah. Absolutely. What did you guys think about his first story about the road crossing?
Whenever I took my family to the zoo a few years ago, I also saw Dave there. For somebody who worked in a zoo and was that close to animals, I know he wasn't working with the animals specifically, but just to being around them, I feel like if it were a bear, he would know. And he starts thinking to himself that this isn't a bear, and he's like basically questioning himself. As time goes on, he's starting to kind of convince himself that, maybe it was just an elderly bear. But to me, his initial reaction was, this wasn't a bear. I don't know what this thing was. And to me, that's the more genuine reaction.
Yeah, I agree. I was only going to say that. And one, I know exactly what stretch of highway he's talking about. For those of you who don't, Route 28 is kind of a main artery in the Pittsburgh region. And for a good while, it kind of, and particularly in the area where Dave was at, it hugs the Allegheny River. It's never more than a few miles from the Allegheny River. Anyhow, when I was thinking about it, I was intrigued by that he saw how it moved. That was particularly interesting to me. And the thing is there something else that could be, I think you've already hit upon the likely culprit, a bear or whatever. We do have plenty of bear in our region, and their numbers have been going up in the past few years, as you're aware. But the one thing I kept coming back to is that, yeah, when you see one black bear to another black bear, they do look very similar. But could there be an anomalous bear, say a bear with some sort of condition? We've heard about a lot of times people that think they've seen some sort of cryptid and it becomes like a bear with mange, or there are bears born with abnormalities periodically, as there are other animals, and like an injured animal might walk differently or something. These were the things that I was trying to reconcile with. And of course, even if you're very familiar with the local wildlife, you might not be prepared in that moment to view that and be able to identify, well, clearly this is the issue. It's a bear that has this medical or possibly genetic condition or this sort of injury.
No, I completely agree. And like Mike said, the fact that his reaction was that of confusion that stayed around, because being someone who works at a zoo, like, again, even though he's not like a biologist or a zoologist, he is around large animals more than almost any other average person, except for people who maybe work on a farm. And the fact that he didn't immediately identify it as a bear has to at least give you pause, I think. And I think you're right, Nick, that there are abnormalities. Like, if it was a bear, could you have a bear that has long legs, a much more straight face, jowls, and lumbers rather than runs? I don't know enough about bear biology to say if you can have all those things in an adult bear. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. I honestly don't know. I think that's why it's so intriguing.
Yeah, and we've talked about albino animals, and of course albino deer are, you've talked about, there was one living out by, we mentioned Slippery Rock University, where we all met Dave at one point or another, which is again north of Pittsburgh. There was an albino deer living in that region for a while that got a lot of notoriety because they're kind of fabled animals. I have an albino squirrel living in my neighborhood right now, and I get excited every time I see it. But honest to goodness, if you weren't prepared with that sort of thing as being a possibility, and you saw it again without knowing about there being albino animals and whatnot, it would really throw you off for a little while, would it not? Because you could reconcile and you could be like, it kind of looked like a squirrel, but it was white. I don't know white squirrels. And now you're looking at it a lot closer than you might look at the physiology of a typical squirrel. And so now maybe its tail looks larger than normal squirrels to you. Maybe it's packed its face full of nuts. And now you're like, oh, it's got jowls. I think anytime that there's something unique about any individual animal or person, you hone in not just on the unique thing, but you notice other aspects about them as well that maybe would have gone unnoticed.
I think that's a really good point about how we view things that we don't immediately recognize and notice as anomalous in one way or another. I think that's a good point.
I don't want to harsh on Dave because again, as I've alluded to, I have a history of doing that, but it's I don't care to repeat. But I'm trying to reconcile these things in the most rational way I can.
Looking at it rationally is a great way to approach it, but I also want to look at it a little bit more irrationally. You know, from somebody who, like myself, is very interested in Bigfoot, he had described it as a sloppy gallop.
Yeah, he said it didn't run how you would expect a bear to run.
But something that comes up a lot in Bigfoot reports is that there are times when Sasquatch drop down to all fours and take off and be pretty quick about it.
And be very quick about it, yes.
The fact that he's sloppy, that it was a sloppy gallop could imply that it was, not often on all fours, but just at this one particular time.
Yeah, like almost how when you see gorillas, it's almost like a shuffle.
Right. I
think that's a good point, Mike. And it also, if we want to take the cryptid route on this one, I would even go so far to say is the fact that it had, he said, kind of like skinny-ish legs.
Yeah, leggy. Like he said leggy.
It was leggy.
Yeah.
It had long, shiny hair, had a longer face. Could this actually not necessarily be a Sasquatch sighting, but could this be a Dogman sighting?
A Dogman or a Sasquatch with a dog face. I've heard about those too, which isn't necessarily a Dogman, because Dogman's usually, from what I understand, are usually a little bit smaller, right?
I think. Like, again, I'm by no means an expert, but yeah, I'm not an expert, unfortunately.
Well, at least if nothing else, we know that like Dogman sightings usually are a little bit more scary, I guess is the best word.
I know there's been Dogman sightings allegedly up near Sharon, PA, which is not close, but maybe in the realm of that animals or cryptids range. Maybe it's within the range. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he really does. It's interesting that it was in such a... I mean, that seems like a relatively populated area, though.
It's a populated area, but there's pockets where you have, like, the mountains on the west-hand side that have lots of forest. So, I mean, again, that's why I still also think the whole bear idea has legs, we might say, because there are pockets of forest around there. So having a bear sighting, is probably not common by any stretch. But I agree with Dave, and I think all of us here that's, if we're being reasonable, the most likely culprit. I'm saying possible Dogman if we want to be fun about it.
And one more thing about that, Nick mentioned it being on 28. Our first story on the podcast that was about my dad's encounter with a hooded figure.
Oh yeah,
that was also right off of 28, and where his house was at one point it was a town, and they actually put the highway in there, and the row of houses across the street were all demolished.
Oh, to put the overpasses and stuff in.
Yeah, so when you're driving on 28, it's like basically right there. You can see it from the highway.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. So then Dave had his third story with us about kind of like, I guess it's like a family story almost, where it sounds like great aunt knew about their grandfather's sickness by some other way. What do you guys think about that one?
This is a story that I feel a lot of families have a story like this, where some sort of information was kept from somebody, but either just because the feeling is oftentimes because they had such a strong connection with that person, or they just had some sort of sense. They had an inclination. That's kind of the vibe I get from this. But of course, her statement about somebody, was it Charlie?
Charles, I think, yeah,
Charles, yeah. Told her. Like, that's where things get that sort of creepy things. Maybe, though, it was in a dream or something. I don't know. It's just, this does sound like a thing that does really happen, though, is that information is kept from somebody, but that somebody then figures it out or blurts it out like they were told or like they've always known. And, you know, if there's someone you really care about and something's going on with them, you can read more than maybe you've been led to believe.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, it's kind of like strength in numbers. There's so many stories like this where people, especially when they're kind of near their deathbed, are hearing things from family members who have passed or, you know, old friends who have passed. And I just found that interesting that even with the popularity of these types of stories, that this just happened to another family, you know. It wasn't, you know, prompted, and this is a story within their family. So it's not like they're trying to jump on the bandwagon, you know.
Yeah, I feel like whenever we talk about either near-death experiences or end-of-life experiences or anything that has this kind of like weight and gravity to it, there's some kind of universal knowledge that a lot of people seem to agree exists in these very both important and liminal times when someone is near death. And I think a lot of people feel that one way or the other, regardless of cultural or religious standing. Whenever there's information being passed, I think that's an interesting data point to put on something that we usually don't like to ascribe data points to. Because I feel that if this woman was in her last days, which it sounds like she was, and was, you know, somehow communicating with, like you said, Mike, previously passed on loved ones, if there was just a feeling around it, or we're like, oh, I feel like I've, you know, been seeing people or whatever, that's one thing. But whenever you have information passing, that's, I think, a much different story, and something that's it's worth noting, because that I just don't see how, for all that we don't understand about death and how the human brain works and things like that, gaining information doesn't sound like just the throes of a dying brain to me, because there's no evolutionary benefit to it. Whenever people want to talk about seeing a light and feeling good and feeling of hope around, especially near-death experiences where people can tell us about them afterwards, I can understand from an intellectual level why someone would think, okay, that's just the brain dying and there is some sort of evolutionary benefit to releasing those endorphins to making you think that things are okay. I think that is a very different conversation from information coming in the other direction with stories like this. And it always blows my mind whenever, like you said, Mike, lots of folks have these stories and people are willing to agree that like something really weird can happen around people's end times, but then they don't want to take the next step and say that mechanism that we don't understand but agree is there extends to other parts of our life as well.
What you're talking about, and also like with near-death experiences, it almost seems like it's accepted by everybody that something weird goes on in these times.
Yeah, one way or the other, regardless of mechanism. Right. Absolutely.
You know, no one really knows what it might be, but this is kind of one part of the paranormal accepted by a lot of people.
No, I agree, and I think it's important to, like I said, make the distinction between stories that have data associated with them. Because again, we're not scientists obviously, but trying to be more rational about it, saying that in some of these instances, people feel like weird things happen. Whenever there is data present coming the opposite direction, I feel like that should be something that everyone kind of perks up and goes, hey, there has to be a mechanism in place here that we don't understand that is conveying this information. It's being seen by this woman in this case as her deceased brother, Charles, and he somehow has information about what's going on 100 miles away in Pittsburgh. like that in itself is kind of crazy, but everyone's like, oh yeah, that happens.
Privately, earlier we were talking about synchronicities
all the time.
And this is kind of a synchronicity that happened because today I was watching a show and they were talking about DNA and how sometimes, one of the first examples was sometimes people will get transplanted organ through the DNA and they will start to like have hobbies and take on different personality traits and cravings.
Yeah.
There was that great song, Gary Gilmore's Eyes, where
I thought about that, what you said.
Serial killer Gary Gilmore's eyes, because they were, I believe, the first successfully transplanted, thank you. They were the first eyes to be successfully transplanted, I believe. So somebody woke up looking through the world, the lens of a serial killer. Very unsettling.
And they went on to talk about twins and how sometimes one twin can be in a different place and feel like their other twin is in danger.
Yeah, as someone who knows multiple sets of twins, both paternal and fraternal, there is some weird stuff that goes on between twins. And again, that's something that like a lot of people will say, "Oh yeah, of course that happens." But then whenever we mention that, like whenever we like to conjecture that like ghosts might exist, people are like, "Oh, you guys are crazy." It's like, wait a second.
One of the theories, with all that is that it's through DNA.
Yeah,
it could be with the sister or Dave's aunt and his uncle. I mean, there's a DNA connection there.
Mm-hmm.
But the only thing is that his aunt said basically the way she made it sound was like they were communicating.
Yeah. Well, and if you want to dive down this rabbit hole, that gets into the whole idea too of like mirror particles in physics, where you have sympathetic reactions between two separate particles that are somehow linked in quantum physics. I'm not a quantum physicist, but they say that like you'll have these quantum particles that are separate, like they exist in separate places in space, but when you affect one, it has the same mirrored effect on another particle. Basically bringing up the idea that you can have something existing in multiple places but affect only one of them, but it affects all of them. Is that a mechanism for how information can be transferred between similar strands of DNA? Who the hell knows? But I think that the fact that we're even conjecturing on the mechanism is a step in the right direction, at least, to try and figure this stuff out, because it definitely happens.
Well, I think Dave had some neat stories. I really liked the stories he brought.
Oh, absolutely, and he's a heck of a storyteller too.
It's just cool to hear Dave, because I haven't seen him in some time.
Yeah, good dude. 10 out of 10.
Thanks, Dave.
I'd go back
and criticize his stories some more.
Absolutely. If it meant that we could hang out again, I would be ever so critical.
Okay, so we got a story from one of our Instagram followers. Her name is Chloe, and Nick's going to read it, so here we go.
All right. Anytime we read a letter, though, we open up, as you know, with Brendan giving an impersonation of author Robert Pirsig checking the reserve tank of a Triumph motorcycle. Brendan?
He was going to do it, too.
He was whining. He was leaning into that microphone.
I was getting close.
So here's the story. During my senior year of college, I worked in a 100-year-old building in St. Petersburg, Florida. The restroom nearest my office was just down the hall, but in an area that wasn't very highly trafficked. Also, to set the scene, the bathroom was an old locker room that was in two parts. The first door, always locked, only the 4 people in my office and the cleaning staff had access to it. And it would open to a small room with a few lockers and a second door that had a toilet, sink, and shower. So one day, I head over to the restroom and key into the first door, and as I enter, I hear people whispering. My first thought is that it was the cleaning staff gossiping in the second part of the room, but I thought it was odd because no lights were on, so I approached the second door and knock, and I say hello, and I don't get any answer. So after a second of thinking, I try the handle and open the door to find no one there. I do my business and wash my hands, and as I reach for the handle to leave, right in my ear I hear, "Hello?" And I hightailed it out of there. After that, I'd walk way out of the way to use a different restroom.
Wow. So I have a few thoughts on that. So at first, whenever she mentioned hearing the initial voices, I'm like, okay, well, we all know, especially in some of these old school buildings, the ductwork can carry voices a long way. So I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of creepy, but could have a reasonable explanation. But whenever you hear a voice like that, like in your ear, there's no mistaking that,
Well, I know Mike had some follow-up questions.
Well, actually, ironically, that's exactly what one of them was. I mean, I said, is there any way that voices could have been traveling through the vents or something that may have been that initial whispering that she heard?
Yeah, I think it sounds like that, like that's the Occam's razor of the first part, I think.
Was she able to respond to your question?
She did say it was a possibility that were to happen because it was like a cement hallway. So sound would be bouncing off.
Bounces.
Though she did, follow up with it. It wasn't likely that would be the case because that's not an area where there's people really at.
Okay, so it's used a little less. So that would be, that makes sense.
But it's one of those things like, were that to happen and that be the only thing, it probably would have never been talked about again.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Like the voice, like a voice in your ear, our ears are very, very sensitive and they are very good at discerning directions of where sound is coming from, and also how far away that sound is given how it reacts to your ear versus the room around you. The fact that she heard those voices initially and was like, oh, kind of weird, but whatever, and then here's a voice in her ear, like, again, it's something where your brain doesn't mess those kinds of things up very often unless you have some sort of inner ear problem, which I think if she did, that would have been something that would have been included. Man, that's just really spooky. Also, in a college like that and everything, you have so much energy, both good and stressful, that it seems like any place like that is always a breeding ground for just anomalous activity in general.
I did ask her if there were any kind of stories about hauntings in the building, and she said no.
Yeah, that almost makes it weirder when you hear these kinds of stories.
Right.
Yeah, because the first thing I would want to ask was if she had ever felt weird in the bathroom before. Because, we've all talked about being in places where we have felt, like I said, when I first moved into my new house, which is an older house and is admittedly a pretty spooky place because of just some aspects of it. I had mentioned that I didn't know the house well enough to feel comfortable going downstairs at night because I'm such a nerd that I freak myself out to the nth degree. And so I'd have to convince myself, like, I don't really have to go to the bathroom at all, like, very bad. And when I finally, like, had to come to terms with, like, yeah, I need to get up and do something, it was like I ran there. And I ran from light to light. You know how you do.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I think this also brings up the fact that some restrooms in some college buildings are super creepy and others aren't. So, like, we went to Slippery Rock. If you were in a restroom in Old Main, much creepier than one in like the brand new Arc.
Well, and it's the one place you definitely don't want
so
to
vulnerable.
Feel any sort of discomfort.
Yeah, that's the last place you want someone whispering in your ear.
If I'm in a public restroom and another person walks in, I will sit there and wait until they leave before I will exit the stall.
I thought you were going to say you kicked the door open.
Oh, yeah. One time, Michael's wife and my wife, we were all on a camping trip together and we went to a restroom, or we did that. That came up very wrong. We went to a restaurant. We went to a restaurant together for dinner. I went to the restroom by myself because I'm an adult. And I heard somebody approaching the door, and the restroom door didn't have a lock. So I went to put my foot up to keep the door closed, and so I could say something, but the door swung outward.
So I mean, at that point,
so I just kicked the door wide open, so this person had to see me on the toilet. And that's what Mike is referring to, and I just realized how terrible I sound cracking up in the middle of a word, how juvenile.
No, but imagine, but again, it's one of those things where that was just the idea of someone possibly opening the door. Imagine being in the restroom and someone whispering in your ear. God, I can't get over that. Like,
if ghosts are real, that's how I want to come back. I want to haunt, and I want to be a reoccurring thing where people walk by a bathroom door, and occasionally I just kick it open with my pants around my ankles. Boo!
Well, something that I caught today when I reread the story, I hadn't caught it the first time. When she first goes into that room, the first room, and she thinks she hears whispers, she says out loud, "Hello." And then whenever she's leaving, it's the same thing back in her ear, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, that's a good point. Like the mimicry almost. Because you're right. Because I mean, like that's a natural reaction. Even if, like let's say we can't explain away the initial sounds as, or we want to explain them away as just like ductwork or something. If it was clear enough that she felt the need to respond, you know, just being courteous, that tells me that those voices were probably a whole lot clearer than what we're kind of speculating with some of what we're talking about.
Well, and
here.
I know mimicry is one of those things that you've talked about really kind of creeps you out because it's indicative almost of something trying to pretend to be, or
something about anything that has to do with doppelgangers, mimicry of any kind. Just like whatever part of our parasympathetic nervous system gets triggered by the whole uncanny valley response, it just really shakes me. Like I don't like that. It really creeps me out.
And it's almost like taunting.
Oh, totally. Yeah, depending on how it's said, that can be really, really go from very almost playful to very aggressive. And
something else to note, last week we talked about people completely avoiding places because it scared them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the same thing. Like she said she didn't go back to this bathroom.
I wouldn't.
Because it was...
Yeah.
Right. I would avoid that bathroom as well. So
can we... Cool. Is there a public review, like a Yelp for restrooms? I know New York City used to have some such sort of thing. I would... how many stars would you give that restroom, Brendan?
Oh, it would only get 3 rolls of toilet paper out of 5.